Good morning, everybody. I'd like to talk a little bit about Module 5. I've had a few email questions already, so I think it's time to get my video out to you. So let's have a look. So if we jump into the content, I'll just first comment that as we saw in the Module 3 and then in Module 4, we're really focusing on two elements here. One is conveying your content or your ideas and so forth to your audience, your students. And then the second aspect is how do we do that using some of the technology at hand. So we really want to keep in mind the instructional nature of this, who our audience is, and what kinds of tools are we using. So if we jump in here, this is about technology and the law. So you can read through some of the learning objectives. It talks about new technology skills, not limited to digital video, screencasting, podcasting, and so forth. And so if we come down here, what it's asking you to do, you could do this in small groups, or you can do it on your own. We do have a few students, especially if you have a colleague nearby, or someone in the same school board, that's often a good choice. So what you're going to do is look at some of the criminal cases that have been presented in the course. And then you're going to engage in these prompts to share a one-page, what it calls a graphic education newsletter or poster. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be online. I mean, ideally, it would fit into a web page and view online, ideally. But I also like the idea that it should be a poster that you could print and put on the wall of your classroom or office or what have you. Because it also says here to include a QR code that leads to a web page. So if this is not printed, if it's an actual online tool, you don't necessarily need a QR code because you could just put the link. So a QR code tells me that there is a printable version of this project. So let's see what it's asking you to do. So you're going to look at some cases. You're going to pick one of those cases, and then there's 3 prompts that you should really consider. So the first part of each question really gets you to think, well, what's the essence of the question in relation to the case? And then the second part of the question is a guiding question that you can use to design your infographic. So in this case, what was the outcome of the case that you looked at? And so what did you learn about technology-facilitated violence and the law? So part of your graphic education newsletter should talk about the case itself and some interpretation of the law to that particular case. Now, a couple of you asked, do we need to do a specific case or can it be more general? So I always think it's great to start with a specific case so we can read more about that case and understand a little bit more about the context of that case that might not be present in our graphic. But then once you have that specific case and the outcome of the case, it then becomes much easier to give a more generalized discussion. So if you look at question 2, it asks, do you feel more capable and knowledgeable to intervene effectively? So that's kind of for you to think about, well, what did you learn from question 1? But the actual point that you might consider in your graphic is how, it should say what advice, it says how advice, but it should say what advice might you give to someone to support them, to gain confidence and competence. So again, really think about, well, who is your audience? And then target the advice to your audience. So if you're working in an office with other colleagues, that's your audience. If you're teaching in grade 2 or 3, that's your audience. So think about what advice would you give to your audience. And then a more generalized question for you, do you think there are enough social and legal protections? So you can ponder that in the relation to the focus area that you've decided to share or present to your audience. And then think about how do we navigate either the gaps or the steps in the legal system. So depending on your context, maybe the gaps aren't as problematic as they are in other areas. So really, the focus here is navigating the law or legal protections within that particular area. So to answer some of your questions, the prompts really, you should be able to answer these questions or the second half of each question through your poster or newsletter or the format that you've decided to share. It doesn't actually say for you to make any comments, just share the poster, but it might be useful to share a couple of comments. It'd be nice to know, is there any particular reason why you chose that focus area or that particular case? I would keep it just to a couple hundred words, 200 or 300 words, just to give us a little more context. And so when you think about the idea that you're going to print this, then you might want to think carefully about, well, what format will you share into the discussion forum? So it should be easily downloadable and printable. So it could be PDF, could be an image, but those tend to be a bit more problematic. So you might want to think about how do you get it into a PDF format. And then, of course, you will then comment on 2 of your peers' posts, and that should be that. So I think, again, just to repeat one comment I made, it's continuing the theme that you're sharing some information to your audience around the use of technology, and then you're demonstrating your own ability to use that technology to share the information content process, especially when we talk about navigation, to your audience, to your students or your colleagues. So I think that covers everything I wanted to say. Again, keep a clear focus on who is the audience for your poster. All right, thank you so much.